Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Lauren grew up on the same street as Patrick. Ever since she was a little girl, she'd watch from her window as he walked by, always surrounded by friends, always smiling, like he was the center of the world. He was the kind of kid everyone wanted around. He had charm, good looks, and a confidence that wasn't taught, it just came naturally. Meanwhile, she stayed in the background of her friend group. She wore braces, kept her hair tied back, and dressed quietly. Her self-esteem was hidden, buried under comparisons and silence. Still, her heart would race every time she saw him crossing the street, kicking a ball around, or calling his buddies to grab a snack. Lauren dreamed of being noticed, even for just a second. But Patrick looked right through her, like she was just part of the neighborhood scenery, not someone with real feelings. Teen years only made it worse. He stayed popular, switched girlfriends often, and seemed to have a magnetism that made no logical sense. Every time he showed up holding hands with a new girl, Lauren's chest would tighten. She tried to hide it, acted like she didn't care, but just hearing his name in a conversation would make her blood heat up and her stomach twist. It wasn't really about the girls themselves, it was about the chance they had to be seen, admired, wanted by him. For years, she carried that feeling in silence, like someone saving a love letter they'd never send. Time went by. School ended, and life moved on. Lauren threw herself into her studies, chose architecture, and dove into books, projects, and drafting tables. Slowly, something inside her began to change. The braces came off. Her hair found its shape. Her body changed from working out at the gym. And little by little, she started discovering her own beauty, not just how she looked, but her strength. She started seeing herself differently. And with that, others started seeing her too. She stopped being the invisible girl and became a woman who was admired, respected, and confident. She graduated with honors, carved out a space in the job market, won clients, earned praise, and landed a solid position at a promising firm. Lauren had reinvented herself. But even after all that, there was one name still tucked away in a corner of her memory, Patrick. One ordinary morning, while she was reviewing a project on her computer, she heard the front door open. A coworker answered and, a few seconds later, called for her. Said there was a new client who wanted to talk about a home renovation. When she stepped out of her office and walked to the front desk, the shock hit instantly. It was him. Patrick. Same smile as years ago, familiar features, but with a more mature look now. There was something in his eyes that gave away surprise, admiration, maybe even a little nervousness. She held her breath for a second, her heart racing. He took a moment to recognize her. When it finally clicked, he broke into a wide smile and said, almost in disbelief, "Lauren? Is that really you?" The conversation was easy, full of childhood memories, laughs about old neighbors, and stories from school. He explained he'd bought a house nearby and needed someone to help with the renovation plans. Lauren acted surprised, but inside, it felt like the universe had set this moment up perfectly. She took the job, and they scheduled another meeting to visit the property and start taking measurements. Over the next few meetings, their connection grew. They shared life stories, frustrations, victories. Patrick admitted he'd never married, had relationships, but nothing serious enough to stick. Lauren briefly talked about her journey too, left out some old wounds, but showed she was at peace with herself. Gradually, work lunches turned into dinners by choice. Their talks went beyond the project and drifted into future dreams, childhood wishes, favorite songs. The connection was real, intense, different from anything Lauren had ever known. For the first time, she felt truly loved. Seen. Chosen. The relationship started naturally, almost like an extension of their routine. Months later came the wedding, simple, elegant, full of meaning. Lauren would look at Patrick and still wonder if this was actually real. She, who once watched him from afar, now shared her bed, her plans, her life with him. And the craziest part? Patrick was happy. His eyes searched for hers with tenderness. His words were always kind. His affection was constant. Lauren felt like she'd gotten more than she'd ever dreamed of. Their life together was balanced. There was respect, admiration, and deep understanding. He was present, thoughtful, always made sure to remind her how special she was. Over time, they started talking about kids. Patrick often said he wanted to be a father, imagined himself playing with a little boy in the backyard, teaching him to ride a bike, taking him to baseball games. Lauren smiled and shared his excitement. She wanted it too. She felt this love needed to grow into someone else. With that certainty, a new chapter of their marriage began. But before that part of the story could take shape, before those plans could become real, time began to show that not everything is built by willpower alone. And that's where everything starts to change. Patrick's biggest dream was to be a father. He talked about it with that spark in his eyes, like everything he'd built so far only mattered when he thought about having a child. He'd tell stories from his childhood, remember his own dad with respect, say he wanted to repeat the same gestures, pass on the same lessons. Lauren listened with a full heart. Seeing the man she loved talk about a future with a child in his arms moved her deeply. They tried for months, repeating every step with renewed hope each cycle, but time passed and the result was always the same. Lauren tracked her calendar carefully, Patrick kept his optimism out loud, but slowly, excitement gave way to silence. Each new negative test was a quiet blow, and frustration built up between them like a topic no one knew how to bring up. Because she loved him so much, she decided to do whatever she could to make that dream come true. It was her idea, said gently, that maybe they should see a doctor, get some tests, start seeing someone together. The thought was to figure out if something could be adjusted, something delaying the dream they both shared. But the moment Lauren mentioned medical help, Patrick reacted like he'd been punched in the pride. His face shut down instantly, and he shot back a question that echoed in her head for days. Do you think I'm not man enough to give you a child? She tried to explain, said it was just a precaution, that lots of couples did this, that it was just a step, not an accusation. But Patrick stayed firm. He believed they just needed to wait, that nature would do its thing in time. And behind that confident front was a fear he couldn't admit, not even to himself. The idea that there might be something wrong with his own body hurt more than anything else. Time passed. Months piled up like a stack of failed attempts. Lauren kept tracking her cycle, eating right, avoiding anything that might interfere. But with each new negative test, the silence between them grew. Patrick stopped talking about babies. He avoided the subject. Sometimes, when she got excited talking about names or imagining a nursery, he'd change the topic or pretend he was busy. The gap between the dream and reality seemed to widen. And the fear that this wish might never happen started to settle over both of them, even if neither said it out loud. That's when Lauren made a decision on her own. Without telling Patrick, she went to a fertility clinic. She wanted to know if something was wrong with her, something that could explain the long wait. She went through detailed tests, did every step carefully and with hope. When the results came, it was a shock. Nothing was wrong. She was healthy, fertile, ready. The problem wasn't with her. Her chest tightened. The initial relief quickly turned to frustration. Now what? How could she tell Patrick? How could she convince him to get help without crushing his pride? She tried again. She picked a calm moment, set the stage carefully, and gently suggested they see a specialist together. He reacted the same way, maybe even worse. He said things like that were for people who actually had problems, and they didn't. That this was just a phase, that everything would work out on its own. Lauren bit back the urge to tell the truth. She thought about showing him the test results, telling him she'd already started the process, but backed down. She knew it would hurt him even more. She chose to protect him, even if it meant carrying the weight of loneliness alone. In the days that followed, she felt drained. It was like she was fighting for two. Constant effort to keep things peaceful, hide the pain, pretend she still believed patience would fix everything. But inside, she felt her body screaming. Time was passing. Chances were shrinking. And Patrick stayed stuck in a belief that only hurt them both. She wondered how far she could go for that dream. She'd already done everything she could logically. She'd been patient, tried talking, sought help on her own. And still, the deadlock remained. The situation became unbearable. Patrick clung to the idea that it would all happen naturally, and Lauren, even silent, already knew it wouldn't happen that way. Slowly, what had once been love mixed with hope turned into quiet despair. And that's when something started to shift inside her. A thought that once seemed absurd began to gain strength. It started as a quiet idea, then became a possibility with logic, until it turned into a plan that took shape day by day. Because, despite everything, she still loved Patrick. And she wanted to see that smile he dreamed of giving to a child. She wanted to be the woman who gave that to him. Even with pain, even feeling alone, she still believed she was doing this out of love. And maybe, because of love, she was about to cross a line she never imagined stepping over. Lauren started losing herself when she began considering options she never would have thought of months before. She wasn't just a woman trying to get pregnant anymore. She was a wife lost between love and helplessness, surrounded by doubts and expectations that grew heavier every day. When she saw Patrick looking at kids on the street with that distant look, her heart ached. No matter how hard he tried to seem okay, the emptiness was there. And it ate at her. She was sure he'd be a great father, devoted, playful, full of affection. And as much as she tried to push the thought away, the truth was clear: as long as he refused help, nothing would change. In the quiet of nights when Patrick fell asleep early, Lauren would research. She read forums, watched videos, looked for stories of other women in similar situations. It was in this lonely dive that an alternative appeared. At first, it seemed crazy. But over time, it started to feel like an answer. If Patrick wouldn't accept help, and if she was healthy, maybe she could get pregnant with another man. Someone who looked like Patrick, similar height, brown hair, familiar features. The idea started as a whisper, then became logical thinking, and finally, a desire she found herself feeding more often than she wanted to admit. It wasn't cheating for pleasure, not an emotional search. It was a desperate plan, driven by love. She made a fake profile on a dating site. Filled it out carefully, used generic photos, and filtered men who looked like Patrick. Gradually, she started talking to a few. At first, she avoided any emotional connection. Asked direct questions, gave short answers. Setting up the first date was harder than she thought. She hesitated for days. But one ordinary night, while Patrick was in the shower, she confirmed the date and left with some made-up excuse. The meeting was quick. Small talk, tension in the air. She came home feeling like she'd done something wrong, but also with a strange sense of relief. She'd taken the first step. After that, more dates followed. Each one easier than the last. What had started cold and calculated began to awaken forgotten feelings. The adrenaline, the risk, the look of someone who desired her. Without realizing it, Lauren drifted from her original plan. She started giving more than she should. The reason she started was still there, but it wasn't the only one anymore. She was hooked on feeling alive, on breaking routine, on escaping the role of the wife who smiled through pain. The dates became frequent. She started picking specific clothes for these nights, paying attention to details Patrick didn't even notice anymore. Every time she came home, she swore it would be the last. But the next day, she'd find herself answering messages and accepting invitations like it was part of her new identity. Over time, she lost control. It wasn't just about a man who looked like Patrick anymore. It wasn't just about trying to get pregnant. It was another life, parallel, where she felt free from all the pressure. Lauren hit it perfectly. She stayed the devoted wife, present, attentive, caring. She did the grocery shopping, made dinners, praised Patrick's projects. But inside, she was torn. There were days she cried alone in the bathroom, trying to understand how she'd gotten here. Other days, she felt powerful, like she could manage two worlds and still keep everything under control. The addiction wasn't just in the meetings, but in the well-kept lie, in the secret she guarded so skillfully. Even with all that, there was still love. Lauren didn't hate Patrick. Quite the opposite. She still cared for him, still admired him, still saw in him the man she'd loved her whole life. But her anger over his refusal to get help mixed with the frustration of being alone in that dream. And that mix created a space other men started to fill. But unlike what she imagined, none of them offered the solution she was looking for. Each meeting was another failed attempt to make sense of the inner chaos eating her alive. That's when chance stepped in. A coworker of Patrick's recommended a new restaurant, small, quiet, great food, not too busy. Patrick agreed. He wanted a calm place, no rush. When they arrived, before even fully stepping into the dining room, Patrick stopped. His eyes locked on one of the tables. There was Lauren, with another man. Too close. She was smiling, touching his arm, whispering something in his ear with clear intimacy. For a few seconds, Patrick stood frozen. She saw him. The blood drained from her face. The man stood up and left quickly, saying nothing. Lauren stayed seated, stunned, staring at Patrick like she couldn't believe this was happening. Patrick walked over, but didn't say a word. His friend understood in silence, patted his shoulder, and left. She stayed there, motionless. Patrick stared at her for a few seconds, then just turned and walked to the car. She followed. They got in without a single word. On the drive home, Patrick exploded. He asked who that man was, if he was the only one, how long this had been going on, what it all meant. Lauren started crying. She tried to explain, but the words came out broken. When she finally managed, she said it all started because of their dream. That she wanted to give him a child, that she got tested, found out there was nothing wrong with her, and tried to talk to him, but the problem was with him. But he never wanted to listen. She said it all got out of control, that the meeting started as a plan, but turned into something else. Patrick, in shock, asked how many there had been. She was crying so hard she couldn't answer. The pain on his face was worse than any scream. The silence that followed was the cruelest. And there, in that car parked in their garage, everything they'd built started to fall apart. Not with drama, but with too many truths from years of pretending. When they got home, Patrick just asked Lauren to pack her things and leave. His voice was flat, no yelling, no loss of control, but carried a tone sharper than any shout. She tried to say something, explain again, but he wouldn't let her. He repeated the sentence, this time looking her in the eyes. Lauren went upstairs with shaky legs, crying so hard she could barely see what she was putting in her suitcase. Each folded piece felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Each step out of the bedroom was like carrying a piece of her life away. As she left, she tried to look at him by the door, but Patrick kept his eyes fixed on some distant point, refusing to give in to her plea for mercy. It was like, inside, a part of him had died. She went to a friend's place with just a few clothes and the feeling she'd destroyed everything. She spent days lying in bed, switching between crying fits and long silences. She tried writing messages, drafted and deleted them over and over. Every attempt to justify herself felt emptier. She knew there was no excuse that could erase the betrayal, even if it started with an intention she once swore was love. When she tried to set up a conversation, Patrick refused. He said any contact should go through lawyers. That hit even harder. Lauren knew he was hurt, but she never imagined he'd be so cold. The sweet, loving man she married was completely gone. In his place was a stranger, wounded, who just wanted distance. The divorce went quickly. Patrick didn't want to drag anything out. He told her to take her personal things and whatever she needed to start over, but didn't want to talk. Lauren followed along like someone signing papers without really reading them. Everything that represented years of building a life became a stack of documents, stamps, and signatures. The marriage certificate was replaced with another, officially ending their union. When the final envelope arrived, Lauren stared at it for minutes before opening. It was the most painful full stop of her life. A period she put there herself, even as she kept telling herself it was because of love. Patrick, on the other hand, threw himself into a new routine. He changed his commute, avoided the same places, pulled away from mutual friends. He preferred silence over reliving the restaurant scene, or worse, remembering Lauren's words in the car, admitting it all started because she wanted to fulfill his dream. That tore him apart. Not because he didn't understand her pain, but because he felt betrayed from the inside and out. He didn't know which was worse, being deceived or being the reason she fell apart. For weeks, he carried that duality. He felt anger, but also guilt. He thought of the past fondly, but the present was a minefield where any memory could blow up. For a long time, he avoided any kind of relationship. He preferred a lonely routine over the questions that would come if he let someone in. He met new people, exchanged a few messages, but always stopped halfway. He was afraid of repeating what he'd lived through, afraid of trusting and losing himself again. His trust had been damaged in a way kind words or gentle touches couldn't fix. The pain of being betrayed, not for desire, but for a hidden plan disguised as a solution, left deep marks. Still, he didn't let himself be destroyed. He had a quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need applause but holds up someone who's been through too much. Lauren tried to rebuild her life. She changed jobs, avoided old co-workers, cut ties that reminded her of Patrick. At one point, she thought about trying to reconnect with him, or at least have a conversation. But every attempt stopped at the same question: what would she even say? What could justify everything? She knew she was wrong, knew she'd crossed a line, but she also knew it all started from a love that turned into desperation. That was the cruelest dilemma, doing the wrong thing, even for a reason she believed was right. Lauren lived with that conflict like someone carrying a scar that burns from time to time, just to remind her it's still there. 2 years passed. And in that time, Patrick met someone. A woman different from Lauren. She had a calm energy, a simple way of seeing life, a smile that didn't need explaining. They got to know each other slowly, carefully, like people who didn't want to rush rebuilding what had once been broken. She understood his silence, respected his limits, and little by little became part of what he was starting to believe he'd never have again. When she showed up with a pregnancy test, Patrick felt the ground shift once more. Lauren's words echoed in his head, saying the problem was with him. He froze, unsure how to react. While the news filled him with hope, a shadow crept over him from the inside. Overcome with confusion, he sat down with his new partner and told her everything. Every detail, from the failed tests to discovering Lauren's secret meetings. Not as an excuse, but as a way to open up. He needed her to know what was going through his mind. She listened in silence, but by the end, she was crying. She said it hurt to hear that she felt tested by a story that wasn't hers, and that, even so, she understood. Patrick held her hand and apologized. He said he didn't want to doubt her, but he needed to share what he was carrying. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and said she'd stay with him. That it wasn't fair for her to pay for old mistakes, but she understood that sometimes, past pain shows up uninvited. And with that gesture, she reignited something in Patrick he thought was lost: trust. Not in others, but in himself. The baby was born on an ordinary morning, no special warning, no movie scene. Patrick was there, next to his new partner, holding her hand as everything unfolded with a kind of intensity that was hard to describe. It wasn't the moment itself that shook him, but what it represented. A child. Something he'd waited for, dreamed of, imagined, and for so long believed he'd never have. When he heard the baby cry, something inside him opened up. The feeling was instant and sharp. It wasn't excitement or relief. It was a deep dive into memories he thought he'd buried. That baby's cry filled a space that had been empty for years. A few minutes later, when the nurse brought the newborn to him, Patrick hesitated. He reached out carefully, but his eyes still wavered. And then he saw the baby's face. And there was no denying it. It was him. His own reflection in a body just minutes old. The features, the shape of the eyes, even the way he scrunched his forehead. That silenced any doubt left. It was his son. The son he once believed he could never have. The son Lauren had tried to give him in every way possible, the wrong way, with wrong choices, but for a reason that now made more sense than he'd ever want to admit. He stood there for a few seconds, staring at the baby in his arms, not saying a word. His new partner, tired, watched from a distance with a mix of emotion and caution. She knew how much this moment meant. She knew that behind that emotional gaze was an old battle being silently won. Patrick didn't say anything to her then, but something changed in the way he looked at her. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the realization that she was there, fully, available, trusting him despite the shadow of the past he'd brought into their relationship. She could have judged, walked away, questioned everything. And still, she stayed. That gave the moment even greater value. In the weeks that followed, Patrick threw himself into fatherhood with almost total devotion. Every diaper change, every sleepless night, every little yawn from his son felt like a gift he lived as if it were a miracle. The old pain was still there, but now it shared space with something bigger. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something no one could take away. It wasn't just having a child that changed everything, it was what the child represented. Proof that his story didn't end broken. That rebuilding was possible, even after so much wreckage. Still, there were days when the memory of Lauren surfaced out of nowhere. Not out of romantic longing, but from the awareness that she'd tried, in her own way, to give him this same dream. And failed. He thought of her sometimes when he held the sleeping baby, remembering her words in that car, sobbing, saying she just wanted to see him as a father. It was painful to realize that, deep down, she hadn't lied about that. She'd just chosen a twisted path to fulfill a genuine wish. And that made everything even more complicated. Forgiveness, even if never spoken, started to form inside him. A quiet understanding that grows when time clears what pain once distorted. One day, while sorting through some old boxes he still kept in the guest room closet, he found a letter Lauren had written months after the divorce but he'd never read. It was in an unmarked envelope, lost among old documents and papers. She apologized. She explained everything again, but more calmly, with fewer excuses and more awareness. She said she accepted his judgment, understood his distance, but that she'd never stopped loving him. She said she didn't want to get back together, didn't expect forgiveness, she just wanted him to know that, despite everything, she still believed he'd be the best father in the world. The letter ended with, "If this ever happens, if some woman gives you what I couldn't, just promise me you'll be everything I always knew you could be." Patrick read the letter a few times. Then he put it back in the box, no tears, no anger. It was just confirmation of what life had already shown. That sometimes, people mess up while trying to do the right thing. That love, as strong as it is, can get lost if it walks alone. And that some destinies are shaped the right way, even after so many wrong steps. The baby was asleep in the crib when he returned to the room. He looked at his son, now a few months older, and was certain of one thing, he'd never need explanations about the past. Because his future was starting clean. No guilt, no debt. with enough love to live it fully. And in that moment, without saying a word, Patrick understood the true meaning of everything he'd lived through. Some pains never go away. But they can make room for something greater. Something that, when it arrives, changes everything. And turns what seemed impossible into a new beginning. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.